Hey folks, and welcome to our Q&A live session. If you guys could do me a favor, let me know in the chat down below if you can see me and if you can hear me. That way we'll know that we're good to go, and then we can go ahead and get started with some questions. Looks like we got a few folks here already, like we might have some folks on their way. Hopefully we have some folks from our live proctored practice tests earlier. If you weren't able to make it to those, that's totally okay. But we would like to encourage you to take a practice test at some point this weekend. If you head to the promo video, if you head to the previous live stream, and maybe if you take a look at this description, let me just check. Yes, if you take a look at this description, you should be able to find our paper practice test as well as an official paper practice test that you could take this weekend. And thank you so much to Taya. Thank you. I'm so glad that you can see and hear me. All right, so we are good to go. Really quickly, while we're waiting for some folks to show up, waiting for some folks to throw questions into the chat. My name is Erika. I'm the Senior ACT and SAT Curriculum Manager here at Magoosh. I am relatively new to Magoosh, but I am not new to test prep and specifically not new to SAT and ACT. I've spent a lot of time tutoring, teaching classes, writing explanations, lessons, all that good stuff. If you want to know a little bit more about me, we put out a Meet Erika video last week, so you can go check that out. There's a cameo from my cats for anyone interested in that. But I'm going to be your guide for the next hour. Yes, so Sachiel says, will this be recorded? Yes, so this is going to be recorded. I think we are going to be putting it live on our channel after the fact. Probably better to stick around if you have your own questions, because there's no guarantee that someone else is going to ask the question that you have a question about. So if you have your own specific questions about your experience with your practice test or your experience with your own study, anything even vaguely related to the ACT, now's a good time. Throw those in the chat and I will get to them. All right. So looking like we don't have too many questions so far. That's okay. We had some questions on our live stream from earlier. Oh, got one from Taya. Taya, let me get to that question in just a second. I do want to go ahead and answer a couple of questions that we saw earlier on our proctored test live stream. So we had one student who was particularly concerned about time management on the math section. That's kind of a big one. We had another student who was worried about what to do if you finish early. So kind of two opposite concerns, but very, very similar. I want to talk about that a little bit. So the math section on the ACT is one where a lot of folks do have trouble with time management. That's kind of a hard one because the ACT math section is 60 minutes and 60 questions. So you have a minute per question, which is not a lot of time. So a couple of pieces of guidance there for time management. Thing number one that you should appreciate with the ACT math section is that every question is worth the same number of points. So what that means is that if you miss an easy question, it has the same impact on your score as if you miss a hard question. So what that means is we want to make sure that we are doing questions that we can finish quickly. And that's going to be specific to you. Now, typically with the test, it's built so that the questions that are going to be a little bit more efficient, a little bit more straightforward are kind of front loaded toward the beginning of the section. The ones that are a little bit more complicated, that take a little bit more reading, that take a little bit more doing, those are going to come toward the end. You've probably seen, if you've taken some practice tests, that the questions, or if you've taken the real exam, that the questions toward the end, a lot of them are like a paragraph long in the math section, which is kind of intense. And that's on purpose. It's to make you feel overwhelmed when you're running out of time. So recommendation there, if you know that you're not going to be able to get to every question, and that's okay, you can still get a good score and not finish every single question. Know that you want to spend the time on the questions you think you can get right. So if you're running into a question and it is throwing you for a loop, you are having a hard time with it, you don't think you're going to get it right, or if you are going to get it right, it's going to take you a long time, just skip it. Just skip it. Come back to it later. And that's probably my biggest recommendation for time management, is know that you can skip questions. Focus on the ones that you're going to get right. They're going to make you feel good. They're going to help you get through the section, and then come back later for the ones that are more challenging. I also recommend having a good feel for what 1 minute per question is. Typically, we want to go a little bit faster than that in the beginning of the test, because typically those are supposed to be the quicker questions, so we can have a little bit more time later in the exam for those more complicated, higher level questions. So I recommend having checkpoints set for yourself. So about every 5 questions, you should be about 5 minutes in. About every 10 questions, you should be about 10 minutes in, and just kind of keep track of where you are based on that. If you're more than like a couple minutes off of that timing, that's a signal to you that you want to start skipping more questions, that you want to start moving a little more quickly, maybe making some guesses, things like that. So that's my big suggestion on time management if you're going a little slow. Now, if you are finishing early, you're going pretty quickly. One, you may want to take a little bit more time with those questions. You can use that kind of checkpoint concept to figure out if you are ahead as well. So if you are ahead, maybe go, hey, I can give myself a little more time. If I'm guessing if I don't need to be, I can slow down a little bit. I can take a little bit more time with these trickier questions, et cetera, et cetera. But if you do have extra time at the end, that's also pretty normal. What you can do is go back, and if there were questions that you did skip over, now's a great time to do them. If there are questions that you weren't sure of, maybe you put a little mark by them or circled them in your booklet, then you can go back and spend a little more time there. That extra time is a great opportunity to check your work, to make sure you bubbled everything correctly. That is a nightmare when it doesn't go right. It happened to me on my ACT. Don't be like me. Check it. Fortunately, I caught it. But use that extra time to make sure that everything's bubbled correctly, that you did finish every question, and then for any questions you didn't finish or weren't entirely sure of, that you have a little bit more time to go over that. So that's time management, what to do if you're going a little too slow or a little too fast. All right. I have some other questions from the live stream, but I do want to get to Taya's question. Taya says, great. Oh, Taya, that was your question. Amazing. So yes, if you answer all of the questions in a section with time left over. So that I talked about mostly the math section, but that also applies to the other sections as well. So that would be reading, that would be your English section, that would be your science section. Yeah, so whichever section it is that you finish a little bit early, going back, checking your work is a great idea. And then again, I would encourage you, if you are finding that you are finishing early, but there were questions that you guessed on, to just mark those so that you can come back, know that you're going to have time later to reevaluate, put a fresh set of eyes on them, et cetera, et cetera. Cool. All right. Great. Okay, perfect. All right, if anyone else has any questions, again, throw those in the chat on this video so I can see those. I'm just going to be keeping an eye as we go there. And then again, anything related to the ACT, it can be about testing, it can be about your study, it can be about Magoosh, it can be about test cancellations. That is an issue that a lot of folks are dealing with right now, and I'll do my best to answer. But in the meantime, I've got a couple other questions. Addie says, is gum allowed in testing centers? That is a really good question. I think so, but I'm not sure. That's a very interesting question. What I would recommend is going to the ACT.org website and checking there. If it is not allowed, that's where you would see it. So if you head there, there's usually like a page that's about test day, and you can check that to see if that is something that is not permitted. I believe it is permitted. If you're like chewing loudly or like blowing bubbles or anything distracting, they probably are gonna make you spit it out. But I believe it's allowed, but don't take my word for it. I'm not 100% sure. What a great question. I've never been asked that before. Yeah, so Laura says, what if my test keeps getting canceled? Unfortunately, the place where I am is a COVID hotspot. Yeah, I first just want to say totally sympathizing with you here. That is a hard spot to be in. I had some students who are in the same situation or were in the same situation. And it's just very frustrating if you were ready to go for your exam. So I have a couple of suggestions. If you were ready to go for your exam, you have got your score where you want it, you've got your time management down, you are feeling like, yes, I am, just want to be done, just want to take it, then what you're going to be in is maintenance mode. So in maintenance mode, what we're trying to do, we're not trying to necessarily improve our score. We're not necessarily trying to like do anything crazy. We're trying to maintain. So what that means is that we want to be doing a little bit of practice across the various sections, so across the types of questions you're going to see. We're going to be doing a little bit untimed, a little bit timed. We're going to be taking practice tests semi-regularly. And what that's going to do is that's going to ensure that you're not losing any of your knowledge, any of your skills, any of your habits before your test day. And that's really important. I've seen people have really rock solid test scores, take a little bit of time off, come back, and they've lost some of that just due to lack of practice. So what you're going to want to do is be consistent. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to study like a lot. I talked about this a little bit in the Meet Erika video as well, but the thing that I really want to emphasize is you don't have to study a ton to maintain. You just have to do it regularly. So that means a few times a week. And for probably like at least 20 minutes in a sitting, just to make sure that you're getting enough practice that it's actually making it into your brain and making sure that that practice is good, that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, that you're taking it realistically, that you're reviewing your mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my big recommendation. With practice tests, typically my recommendation on practice tests is taking them every 2 to 4 weeks. If you're in maintenance mode, you might be more along the lines of every 4 weeks. This is also going to depend on how long you've been studying as well. So if you've got like a bunch of practice tests, you may be able to take them more frequently. If you're running a little bit low on practice tests, then yeah, spreading that out to more like every 4 weeks is probably going to be a little bit, a bit of a better idea for you. If you are someone who was going to take your test, but you weren't totally ready, then this might be, as much as it doesn't feel like it, a little bit of a blessing in disguise, and that you get more time to improve your score. So in that case, what you'd want to do is take maybe the weekend you were supposed to take the actual test and take a practice test, right? Make sure that you're taking practice tests semi-regularly and that you're learning from those practice tests what it is you should be focused on. Then in your practice, focusing on those things. So targeting that to what you really need. And then the best thing that you can do to improve is to really spend time focusing on your weaknesses and trying to improve those. So that means spending time with explanations, spending time trying to figure out how to recognize this next time, how to do it differently, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my big recommendation, is to be consistent. If you're in maintenance mode, be consistent, but not over the top. You don't want to burn yourself out. So a little bit of practice every couple of days. If you are trying to improve your score further, again, just be conscious of where you're at, your mental and emotional state. Studying for a really, really long time can be kind of draining. So make sure that you're being gentle with yourself, but you can take this opportunity to spend more time with your weaknesses and further improve. That's what I got for you. Okay, we've got some more questions, which is great. Oh, okay, we got a question. Can we ask specific questions from the ACT test Magoosh recommended for today's exam? Yes, you can. I'm going to save those just because those are a little bit more challenging to do because all we have is a webcam. Don't have like a document camera or anything like that. But if we run out of other questions, I will take a look at those and do my best to explain them verbally. But yes, you can throw those in the chat. All right, question from Addie. Oh, okay, another specific question. Math is going to be particularly challenging, just to explain verbally, but I will do my darndest. One thing that I do want to let you guys know is that Magoosh practice test has answer explanations, and those were linked in the description for the live proctor video. Let me see if they're linked in the description for this video. They might be. Let me give that a check. Okay, I don't think they're linked here, but they are linked in the description for that other video. So if you go check that out, they're there. So there are written explanations for each of those questions in that Magoosh exam. The official ACT does not have written explanations, which is kind of a bummer. That's just kind of the downside of official material. It's great, but not always super well explained. So I'd recommend checking that out if you haven't. All right. Cool. Tanishka says, should we retake practice tests if we run out? Great question. It's not ideal to run out of practice tests. And that's an unfortunate reality that a lot of students are running into with test cancellations. So the first thing I would say is try not to run out of practice tests. And I know that that's hard when you don't know exactly when your test date's going to be. So that might mean spacing out your practice tests a little bit more. So less on the every 2 weeks end of things, maybe more on the every 4 weeks end of things. Definitely don't be taking them more frequently than once every 2 weeks. That's not something I recommend in most cases. Just because then you won't have an opportunity to learn between those practice tests. So yes, try not to run out. 2 recommendation is make sure that you have used all of the practice tests at your disposal. There are quite a few official tests out there. Now, some of them are old. So anything before, I think, 2006 is not going to be super applicable to you, just because the test went through some pretty major changes at that point. But anything beyond that, the only real difference is going to be the essay. The essay did go through a change more recently, but the actual, like the test sections that matter a little bit more are going to be the same. So there are at least 6 official practice tests out there from ACT. So just make sure that you found them and that you have used those. There's also this Magoosh one. There are some other ones out there. Quality varies a little bit depending on where you're getting them from, so just be careful. But yes, try to make sure that you are taking new ones if you can. If you are out, to answer your actual question, if you are out of practice tests, probably retaking is the move. Again, I would make it less frequent, just so that they last you a little bit longer. Start with the practice test that you've taken the least recently, do that one, and then kind of move up through there. Make sure, again, that you're taking them realistically, that you're getting as much from them as possible. What I see a lot of people do is really burn through practice tests, like take a bunch of them, like several days in a row, or take them untimed or unrealistically. That's not what practice tests are for. Practice tests, I mean, you don't have to take the entire thing in one sitting if you can't, but in general, I recommend taking them all in one sitting realistically as a replica of what test day is going to be. And then make sure that after you take it, that you are going through all of your mistakes, making sure you really learn from them so you can get more out in your practice. So answered a little bit beyond what you're asking for. Hopefully that did answer your question though. What are some good ACT practice books other than the official ones? So the official ones are obviously great. They have a lot of really great questions in them. One of the things that official materials for pretty much every test lacks is explanation and is kind of detail on concepts. So things that I would recommend, we've got a lot of great resources at Magoosh. You can check out our blog for more information about those. We have a lot of those available for free. If you want to try our online program, there is a 7-day free trial. I would recommend that. If you're looking specifically for books, again, we do have several printable resources that you can check out. Outside of Magoosh, I don't know what I would recommend in terms of books, but some other great resources online. Khan Academy is a source of some other free stuff that's going to be online. Recommend that. One of the great things about Khan Academy is that those materials are official. Again, there's a little bit lacking there just because, again, official materials don't always have the depth in explanations and in conceptual understanding as some other more dedicated test prep resources do. But if you're just looking for more questions and something that you can trust to be accurate, that's a great place to go. My big recommendation would be try out Magoosh. We've got that 7-day free trial, which is really great, and you can try it out on our website. Yeah, recommend that. So we've got video explanations, video lessons for every concept that you're going to see on the ACT. Got a ton of practice questions, got video explanations, text explanations for every single one. So that is what I would recommend outside of official materials. All right. Other questions? You're welcome, Laura. Veronica says, what would taking the ACT test look like this year? Will we have to go in person or can we do it online? Great question, Veronica. So this is kind of funny because the ACT Inc., the people who make the ACT, had said that maybe they were going to do online testing. That is not available. It may yet be available in the future, but it is not going to happen this year. So with that said, testing is in person. If you are going to test this year. The difficulty of testing in person is that depending on where you are, you may or may not be able to do that. So one of the things that a lot of students are experiencing is test center closures. I want to actually share a link with you guys. I'm going to share that in the chat. So if any of you guys are taking your test this month, because there are quite a few test dates this month, I would really recommend that you stay up on, that's the one, that website. That is listing the test center closures for September. And you can keep an eye there to see if your test center is closed. They should also contact you directly so that you know. Times are changing. Things are difficult. So I would recommend that you try to be as proactive as possible about getting that information. But yes, so all of the ACT tests are in person. They are complying with local regulations. So there will be social distancing, masks will be required, et cetera, et cetera. It is the normal version of the test. There is no change to the content as a result. But because of COVID, some test centers are closed and a lot of test centers have reduced capacity in order to spread students out. So that's what it looks like. There's some uncertainty. If you sign up for your test date, you may not be able to take it then. That's what it looks like. The hope is that online testing, if necessary, going into next year, will be available. There's no certainty around that, so I wouldn't rely on it. So yeah, should look like a normal test day, just with masks, a little further apart, and less certainty about whether it's going to actually be held. All right. What else have we got? What's my advice to the ACT beginners? Great question, Reem. Okay, so advice to ACT beginners. First thing would be if you haven't taken a full-length practice test, so if you didn't take it today, or if you just haven't taken one at all, I would recommend taking a practice test. So there is a really great official one. If you just search ACT practice test, it's going to pop up. It's also available on the ACT website, so act.org. And it says like preparing for the ACT 2020 to 2021, or it has different years depending on what PDF you find. It's the same one. That's a really great one to take because it is official. Take it realistically. Sit down, do it in the morning when your test is going to be. Sit in a chair, at a desk, make sure you've had a good breakfast, good night's sleep, that you've blah, 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 right? Take the breaks that you're supposed to have, make sure you're not checking your phone, all that good stuff. Take it really realistically and then grade it. And that's going to help you see, one, where you are, and two, where you're struggling. And that's just going to help you target your study. I see a lot of people who go in and do a lot of study for the ACT or the SAT or any other test really without knowing what they need to be focused on. Make sure that you know what you need to be focused on and spend your energy wisely. That's going to help your score the most, one, but two, it's going to save you a lot of time. And I know that if you are, a junior or a senior or a sophomore, you're busy. It's a hard and busy time. So save yourself the time, take a practice test, get a little more comfortable with what the test is, and then use that to guide your study. That's my biggest advice. Make sure that before you go into your practice test, you know what timing is so that you can kind of anticipate what you're looking at so that you can time yourself accordingly. That would be my big suggestion. From there, you can decide, okay, am I looking to improve a little bit? Am I looking to improve a lot of it? If you don't know what you want on the ACT, do a little bit of research on the schools that you're looking to go to, their average scores, their 25th to 75th percentile scores for admitted students to kind of decide where you want to be. And then based on that, figure out what kind of timeline you need, how much time you need to be studying, and whether or not you're going to need some additional resources outside of self-study to make that happen. So maybe that's an online program like Magoosh, maybe that's a personal tutor, maybe that's a class, anything. Cool. All right. What else have we got? Should I take more than one day off, more than one day of practice? Sorry, okay, I read that wrong. Should I take off more than one day of practice before the test? Great question. So cramming is something that a lot of students do leading up to their test day. I do not recommend cramming. It's not great. And a lot of folks end up going into their test day exhausted. And that's not, you're not going to perform your best if you're exhausted. So I recommend the day before your test to just kind of chill out. Now, the day before your test, or if you're pushing it to the last minute, day before your test, the best thing that you can do is make yourself a little strategy guide or a little strategy cheat sheet. And what that is that's going to be a sheet of paper where you're going to write down all of the most important strategies for you personally, the things that you think you're going to forget on test day. So that might be timing checkpoints for the science section. So like, okay, I've got 5 to 6 minutes per passage. I need to remember that. Maybe I've got a strategy that I am just going to skip conflicting viewpoints on science and come back to that one later. Maybe I've got a strategy which is, okay, with word problems, I need to make sure that I am stopping at the end of every sentence to make sure I really get what's going on. Maybe I've got a strategy, okay, if this is a reading question, I'm going to make my own prediction before looking at the answer choices, those sorts of things. And that's, again, going to be specific to you and your needs. Write those down on a piece of paper. And then on Friday or on Saturday, if your test is on Sunday, whatever day is before your test, you can review that. So you're not going to be doing practice problems. You're definitely not going to be doing a whole practice test. You're not going to be cramming, but you are going to be reviewing those strategies. And what that's going to do is make sure those strategies are like right at the front of your mind when you jump into your practice test. Not your practice test, your actual test. And that's going to help make sure that you're able to shine on test day. I find that a lot of students on test day, sometimes strategy goes out the window because of stress, because of the time, just because, it's the morning, my brain's not quite awake yet. So doing that review of your strategies the day before, thinking about them before your test, thinking about them between the sections is going to help make sure that you do the thing you're supposed to do on test day and don't just resort to whatever's easy. So, recommendation, don't cram on the day before your test. Take the day before that to make a little strategy cheat sheet, review that the day before your exam, and then think about that on test day so that you are bringing your best to the table. All right. Awesome, Tanishka, love that. Okay, so we've got some folks who are studying in Magoosh. Excellent. Hopefully you took that online practice test. That's a really good one. One cool thing about that online practice test in Magoosh is that as long as you haven't gone through all of the questions, it's going to make you a new practice test out of questions that you haven't seen yet. So that's one of the perks of the Magoosh online program, is that it's going to generate a new practice test for you. So that's going to just hold you a little bit longer until your test date. All right, let's see. What else have we got? All right, you are welcome, Tanishka. You're welcome, Veronica. Oh, yes. So Tanishka asked about the online practice test. That is different than the paper practice test. So that paper practice test may have questions that you've seen already. If you've been practicing in Magoosh, those are Magoosh questions. If you take that online test, it's going to basically look at all the questions you've seen in Magoosh so far and go, nope, we're not going to do those. And then pick from the remaining questions to make sure that that is an all new practice test The only case where that wouldn't work is if you have been practicing in Magoosh like a lot and you have gone through the entire bank of questions. So it is different. It's worth taking. It's a really, really cool practice test option. Okay. What else have we got? Reem says, I'm studying on my own, so it's difficult for me to find all the information, and I'm afraid. Yeah, I, again, totally empathize with you. You know, whether that is specific to the test itself or it's specific to right now with test center closures, it's hard to keep up with what's going on just because it is changing every day. Recommendations there. If you're trying to keep up with like test center closures and what's going on with just the ACT and whether or not your test is going to happen, I recommend using that link that I shared in the chat or just going to act.org, kind of keeping up there just to see what's new. Additionally, if you're signed up as a Magoosh student, which I don't know if you are, we're doing our best to keep our students as informed as possible and as in the loop as possible. One of the really cool things about Magoosh, if you are a Magoosh student, is that we have this amazing help button that goes to our student help. And they are just an amazing team of people who are there all the time to answer your questions. And they are experts and they will help you with whatever you need. If you're not a Magoosh student, then yeah, I would recommend hanging out with the ACT website. I would recommend checking out blogs like the Magoosh blog. There are also some other test prep blogs that are really great and really try to stay up to speed there. If you're concerned specifically about knowing everything you need to know on the test, my recommendation there would be maybe try that free trial of Magoosh. ACT, just to kind of see what types of questions there are, see if that's an option that would be useful for you. One of the things that a lot of people struggle with when they're self-studying is not focusing on the right things and not knowing what to focus on, what to study. And so their study ends up a little bit lopsided. Something like Magoosh can help ensure that you are seeing all of the types of questions on the test and that you are prepared there. So I would recommend trying that out. Yeah, it is hard to be alone in the world of the ACT, but there are tons of resources out there. Everybody at Magoosh is here for you. So we're definitely here to help. If you have specific questions, please throw those in the chat because, again, I'm going to be around for a little while and I can help you while I'm here. All right. Question from Addie. Any tips for the 3 scientists passage on the science section? This is the one I take the longest time on, and also the natural science passage on the reading section. Yeah, science, the section, and the science passage on the reading section is one that a lot of students struggle with. So you're not alone in that regard. They are intentionally written to be scary and overwhelming. So if you are feeling scared and overwhelmed, know that that is that's kind of the intention. You are not supposed to understand every word and every sentence in that natural sciences passage or in any of those science section passages. So that would be the first thing that I would encourage you to do, is to give yourself a little bit of grace, a little bit of freedom with those passages to get the big ideas. So zoom out a little bit. If you can tell me just the big idea of the paragraph, if you can tell me some of the relationships there. So like, okay, scientist 1 thinks positively about X and negatively about Y. Okay, scientist 2 thinks negatively about X, positively about Y. Scientist 3 doesn't really fall into any of those boats. Scientist 3 thinks like X is kind of good, Y is kind of good, but like Z really is interesting and maybe we should consider that a little bit more. You don't have to know what X is or what Y is or what Z is, but knowing those relationships is going to help you in a big way. And it's kind of the same idea for natural science. So try not to get overwhelmed with technical, scary language and try to think about relationships. So that's my big suggestion for science. They're trying to scare you with the big words. Don't let them do it. You don't really need to know what they mean. You just need to know relationships. So try to skim that. You can always come back for details later based on what the question's asking for. So that's kind of my big suggestion there. Specifically for the Three Scientists or Comparing Viewpoints passage in science, and I guess also for natural science and reading, if you know that that's one that you really struggle with, like it eats up a lot of time, maybe you don't perform as well, save it for the end. You don't have to do it when you run into it, or you don't have to do it first because it scares you. Save it until later, especially if you do have trouble with time management on the section. Like I mentioned earlier, kind of more in the context of math, if you're worried about time management, do the questions that you're confident on first, and then come to the ones that you're less confident on, that like are maybe going to cause you to struggle more with timing toward the end. So if you're going to miss them, it's not going to impact other questions. It's really unfortunate when you spend a lot of time getting a question wrong, and then it prevents you from getting an easier question right because you run out of time. So that's kind of a higher level testing suggestion. If there's a passage or a question or whatever that's really challenging for you, you can come back later. Just move on for now. Invest your energy in it a little bit later. Cool. All right. Cool. Atmia says, my English section is not increasing. It's stuck at 25. How do I improve? My test is on the 11th of September. Atmia also says, okay, so that's about reading. So Atmia, I'm going to start with your first question, which is about your English section being stuck. Yeah, so that's really frustrating when you feel like you've plateaued. You feel like, oh, I can't get past this 25, or I can't get past whatever it is. That can be a really frustrating place to be in. My big recommendation, it sounds like maybe you're taking quite a few practice tests. My recommendation would be maybe like back away from practice tests a little bit. You want to be taking one again every few weeks, but if all you're doing is taking practice tests, you're not going to see a ton of improvement. Hopefully I'm coming through on the stream okay. Let me know if at any point I'm not. I saw what might be a little fuzziness. So don't take just practice tests. My recommendation, if you're struggling with English in particular, is go back, take a look at the practice tests you've taken before, and take a look at the questions that you've been missing. See if there are common features between them. There are certain types of questions that show up on every test. They don't make up new types of questions. There's certain types that show up. And what you'll probably see is that there are certain types of questions that you're struggling with a little more. Maybe there are certain types of passages that you're struggling with a little more. Maybe there are certain types of wrong answers that are tripping you up. So focus on, for you, what mistakes you're making. And then for those mistakes, don't just try to learn how to get that question right. Try to go, okay, what is the feature in this question that I'm going to see in another question? And how can I get this right next time? So I kind of go about it with 3 questions. I go, okay, what did I do wrong? Why did I do that? And then how do I fix it? Right? So the why I did this, that's going to be extremely personal to you. And it might be, I looked at the answer choices before making my own prediction. Or it might be, I really don't know what a semicolon is. Or it might be, it might be a little more insidious, like, I didn't go back and look at the surrounding piece of text outside the underline. So try to come up with why you did it. And then, okay, next time, maybe I do look at that surrounding text, or I make a prediction for reading, or I spend a little bit more time with my semicolons rules, or whatever it is that's specific to your own mistakes. I find that often when people are stuck at a plateau, it's because they keep doing the same thing over and over and over, and kind of expect to get a different result, which works sometimes, but not always. So what I'd recommend is trying to do it a little bit more differently, and trying to target it to your mistakes. And if you're having a hard time going, I don't know what type of question this is, or what this wrong answer is doing, I don't know why this is tricky, something like Magoosh or something similar can help you type those questions. So going, okay, this is this type of question, this wrong answer is tricky because this is why you might have gotten there, and here's how you can avoid it. So you can do this on your own. It takes effort. I recommend writing this down as well, making an error log, really, really useful. But having guidance like Magoosh or like a tutor can help a lot with that as well. But it is possible with self-study. You can do it. So yeah. Focus on your weaknesses. That's the best way to get over a plateau. Okay. Where can we find high quality practice tests if we run out of the official ones? So we talked a little bit about practice tests and official practice tests earlier, so I'm going to hit this one really quickly, Anna. So first, I would make sure that you did actually run out of official practice tests, because there are quite a few out there. You have to kind of go digging. There's, I think, 6. I might be making that number up, but I believe at least 6 official practice tests that are recent enough that everything except the essay is going to be realistic. So make sure that you have done those. Outside of that, there is that Magoosh PDF that we linked below. That one's really good. There are other free practice tests out there. Quality varies from test prep company to test prep company. What I can say is that the Magoosh online practice test, which comes with our Magoosh ACT purchase, what that's going to do is that's going to make an entirely new practice test based on questions you have not seen in your Magoosh practice yet. So if you are looking for a test experience and you're out of tests, that's a really good one and might be worth it for you. Cool. All right, you are welcome, Reem. All right, Tanishka, do you recommend reading the whole passage? Oh, great question. Love this question. Do you recommend reading the whole passage on the reading section thoroughly? I tried skimming, but it takes me longer to answer the questions, but I run out of time when I read thoroughly. So the reading passage is tricky. Now, different things are going to work for different people. What I personally recommend is skimming, but when I say skimming, I mean a different thing than a lot of people think I mean when I say skimming. A lot of people, when they think skimming, they think speed reading. So that means reading every single word, but really, really fast. That's not what I mean. When I say skimming, what I mean is focusing on first and last paragraphs, focusing on first and last sentences of each paragraph, focusing on sentences with transition words, sentences with really like powerful emotional language. If there's a rhetorical question, read that. But anything that is just fluff, just detail, you know, things like dates, quotes, first, second, third, fourth, also similarly, I'm not going to read that. That's not something that's going to provide me much information. So I'm going to skip over that kind of fluff. Anything that's too technical, anything like describing processes and natural sciences, not going to read it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of skip over a lot of the passage. And I'm probably going to read, depending on the passage, you know, like half of it. Maybe a little, for some passages more. I have a harder time skimming something, you know, that's more of like a literary narrative, just because that has a little bit less structure to it. I tend to skip quite a bit when it comes to more like natural science. But what I'm going to do is, as I go through, this is something that might help you a lot, Tanishka, is at the end of every paragraph, I'm going to stop and I'm just going to quickly go, what was the point of that paragraph? Was that an introduction to this? Was that a counter argument? Was that an explanation with detail? Are they giving me background? Are they saying this thing is bad, but there's potentially a solution? You know, what are they doing in that paragraph? And that's just going to make sure that I have kind of the high level of the passage before I go into the questions. So then when I go into the questions, there are going to be some questions that are broad, like what's the point of paragraph 4? And I'm going to know that based on my read already. For things that are more specific, I'm not going to go to the answer choices. I'm going to go, okay, where am I going to find that in the passage? And based on what I figured out each paragraph is doing, it should be really easy if we've done a solid skim to go back and find that in the passage. So I don't personally read the whole thing. I find that that can take a really long time. If you're a really strong reader and a really fast reader, that might work for you. Some folks like reading the questions and going back and hunting in the passage. I almost never recommend that personally because I find it really hard to figure out where you should be looking if you do that, because you have no idea what's in the passage. And then I find that you end up rereading and missing more questions as a result. So I would recommend to you rethinking what skimming is. Maybe jot down some notes at the end of each paragraph, practice that slowly, and then try to get that up to speed. So rethink skimming, maybe try that again, and then general questions should be quick. More specific questions, you're going to have to go hunting, but the hunting will be easier. Hopefully that helps. Anna, that was your question. Those are the strategies I recommend. So focusing on what's important. Something that I really recommend is thinking about if you were writing an essay. Like if you were writing an essay for school, what would be the most important parts? Probably the intro paragraph, probably the conclusion paragraph, probably the first sentence of every paragraph. If there's like a however in the middle, ooh, that's probably important, you know? But if it's like a quote or like a bunch of dates, that's just supporting, right? That's not going to help you get the big ideas. So that's something that you're just going to want to kind of skip over. So if you were writing an outline for an essay, that's the stuff we want to read. Hopefully that helps. All right. Atmia says, I take too much time on social science, on the social science passage of the reading section. This is also the passage I have the most wrong answers from. Okay, so some folks, so the one that I hear the most about typically is natural sciences. Some folks, it's social sciences. Some folks cannot get behind humanities, whatever. It's going to be different for every student, just depending on you and what's comfortable for you. So my recommendation, if you are struggling with social science, I would recommend all of the tips that I recommended specifically for natural science, which is you don't actually have to know what they're talking about. You have to know why they're talking about it. So focus on relationships, not on trying to understand what X is or what those words mean. So that would be number one. Number two, again, kind of that idea that you don't have to read every word. You want to get those relationships. Try skimming that. Number three, and this one is probably not what you want to hear, but do that one last. If that's the one that you are struggling with the most, and that is taking you the most time and that you're missing the most questions from, just make sure that that's the last one you do. That way you're able to put the required amount of effort into the other passages, make sure that those get the attention they deserve and that you're not feeling rushed through those. So those you will do well with. Social science is going to go how it's going to go. But at least that one's at the end where it's not going to interfere with anything else. Other than that, I would recommend in your practice to try to work more with social science passages if you can, just to get a little more comfortable with them. Just doing like a Google for ACT social science passage, you're more likely to find some examples of those, maybe on our blog, maybe on some other blogs, just so that you have more examples to work with. Definitely don't burn through practice tests just looking for social sciences passages though, or any other type of passage if you have different concerns. Cool. Let's see. You're welcome, Addie. Tanishka says, is it true there is always one section that is harder than the rest? The actual ACT, how interesting. Always one section. I mean, I think that's going to be deeply personal. I think that's going to depend on you and your personal strengths and your personal weaknesses. Some people really don't like the math section and really struggle with that timing. Some people really don't like the reading section. That's the one that really gets them. Some people really don't do well with English, maybe just because it's the first section. Some people really, really don't like science because they find it overwhelming and they don't like the charts, blah, blah, blah. So I would say no. I don't think that's true, that there's always one section that's harder on the actual ACT. I think that what is challenging for you is going to be based on you. And probably what you're going to see is what you see in your practice is going to be reflected on your actual test day. So if you're scoring higher in some sections and lower in some other sections, you're likely to see that reflected on test day, unless they're just like a little, like if they're like a point or 2 points apart, that might not happen on test day. If it's very different on test day, you might want to think about, is your practice realistic, or, you know, is test day getting to you in some way? Sometimes I find folks haven't actually been doing full practice tests at home, so they end up with endurance issues on test day. Some folks haven't been doing actual timed practice. So they end up with timing issues on test day. So to answer your question, kind of going off track here, but to answer your question, no, I don't think so. It's going to be really personal to you. If you haven't taken a practice test to see what's up, and I'm hoping you did today, you likely already have, then you should take a practice test to kind of determine where it is you struggle. That's probably what you're going to see on test day as well. Oh, one thing that I would like to point out is that the ACT does test questions. There are likely to be some questions on your test day that don't end up being counted toward your score. So if there is anything that is bonkers difficult, right, that is like, you're like, there's no way other people got this right as well. If that's true, that something is just like way, way, way too difficult, they will take that into account when they are scoring your exam. Some questions just get, booted out of the scoring because they weren't what they intended that question to be when students took them. So know that if anything is like super off, it will be reflected in your scores. Okay. Oh yeah, and that was from Tanishka. So Tanishka, you've already taken practice tests. You should let me know, are your scores consistent from test to test? Are you finding that different sections are higher or lower? If you're finding that one section is more challenging, that's probably what you're going to see on test day. User 5058 says, how do you approach historical reading passages that use old language? Great question. It's very similar to what I do, just checking our timing, we're still good. It's very similar to what I do for natural sciences or like more technical social sciences. If there is something I don't understand, like a word that I don't understand, I don't really agonize over it. I kind of just go, okay, what's the big idea of this sentence? And if I can get the big idea of the sentence, like, okay, this person feels good about it, great, then that's it. That's all I'm really going to go for. I'm not going to dig too deep for the details. If I need a detail for the question's going to make it clear that I do need that detail, and I'll go back for it then and worry about it then. But if I don't need to worry about it now, I probably won't. Other recommendations there, again, try to zoom out a little bit, focus on the sentences that are more important. So if you realize that the sentence that's really giving you grief is, in the middle of a paragraph and it doesn't have like a however or like any, like a therefore, any really motivating transition word on it. It's not like a conclusion. It's not a new idea. It's not anything like that. It might just be worth skipping over it and seeing if you can still summarize the paragraph afterward. If you can, you probably didn't need it. Now, if it's like the first sentence of a paragraph and you're really struggling with it, then I almost recommend the opposite approach. You don't need to read the whole sentence and then understand the whole sentence. Maybe just take it one little piece at a time. One other useful strategy here is thinking about your English rules, your English strategies. So if you know what a modifier is, or if you don't know what a modifier is, stuff that's set off with commas, not important. You can just kind of skip over that. Or if there's stuff like in parentheses or between dashes, maybe just skip that. If there's a big list, just go, and it's a list of things that the author does not like, or whatever. So try to take that sentence and break it down a little bit so that you're going, what is the key core idea of the sentence? Kind of like we would do in the English section. So that's my big recommendation. And again, if you really struggle there, maybe do it last. All right. Tips for timing on reading. So big recommendation for reading is just know what you're working with time-wise. Let me actually pull these numbers up just so I get them absolutely right. Don't accidentally say the SAT numbers. Great. So the reading test is 35 minutes and 40 questions. That's going to be split between 4 passages. So what that means is that each of those passages is going to be 10 questions, and each of those passages is going to get approximately 9 minutes, a little bit less than 9 minutes. So know that that's a number you're going to want to pay attention to is 9 minutes per passage. So that's going to help make sure that if you're ahead or behind, you know it, and that you can kind of shape your approach accordingly. How long you spend on the passage itself is going to depend a little bit on you. I recommend not, again, reading every single word. You could definitely spend 9 whole minutes just reading the passage itself. Don't do that. That's why it's a good idea to skim, to just focus on the big details, the big ideas, come back for the little details later. That's one of my big recommendations. Another thing that I haven't mentioned yet for time management on the reading section is the idea of predicting an answer. A lot of people spend a lot of time agonizing over wrong answer choices that are trap answers. Don't do that. If you can avoid it. The authors put in answers that are tempting, that make you think, that make you go, that was in this part of the passage. Or like, oh yeah, that sounds good. Or it uses all the right words, but it's the opposite of what you want. Or it's an assumption, or it's a little too extreme, et cetera, et cetera. If you can come up with your own idea for the answer to the question first, it's going to be a lot easier to see that amongst the answer choices and get through the question faster. When you consider every single answer choice, you can get kind of suckered into spending a lot of time with them and over-investing in things that end up being wrong. And sometimes you can get convinced by them. So that's not great. So recommendations, know how long you have per passage and its questions. That's 9 minutes. Do the ones that are easier for you first. Save the ones that are harder for the end. Skim. Think about what each paragraph is doing after each paragraph, just to make sure you have the big ideas. For each question, try to come up with your own answer. Don't let yourself get wound up in the wrong answers. And then if a question is really giving you grief, just skip it. You can always come back later, either at the end of the passage or at the end of the section. All right. Joshua, my test is in 7 days and I've only seen a little change in my math score. What can I do? Great question, Joshua. Okay. So question about being close to your test day. So big thing that I want to say is in 7 days, you're probably not going to see like a massive, massive, massive change. And that's just kind of being realistic. There are a few things that you can do in the last 7 days. What you really don't want to do is cram, so please don't do that. If you haven't taken a practice test this weekend, take a practice test this weekend. That's a really good idea. Do not take more practice tests. That's a really good way to burn yourself out. We don't want that. We want you to be at your best on test day. So take a practice test. Review that practice test. Spend as much time as you need with every question you get wrong so that you go, okay, next time I see something like this, I will not make this mistake again. Then throughout the week, focus on doing questions related to the mistakes you made. So if you really struggled with questions with exponents, spend more time with exponents. If you really struggled with questions about punctuation, spend more time with punctuation. If you really struggled with questions about transition words, spend time with transition words. If you really just struggled with conflicting viewpoint science passages, spend time with that. And then again, the recommendation of putting together a little strategy cheat sheet in the days before your test and just reviewing that, going into your test day is going to help make sure that those things that you really want to happen on test day do. And then the hope is that you come out of test day with at least the score you got this weekend, ideally better. So my big thing is try not to expect a miracle from yourself in 7 days because often that just has negative results. My recommendation would be focus on weaknesses and focus on making sure that what you have succeeded in gaining on or what you do succeed in gaining on this week does come with you to your testing. And then again, if you do have time, you can always retake. That's always an option for you. All right. I'm looking a little fuzzy. Camera might have gone out on me a little bit. Let me try to fix that. Hoping that sorts itself out soon. All right, let me try one more thing. All right, I think it's just gonna figure itself out. Okay, question from All right, user 58, does the ACT use math questions based on the same concepts in the practice test? Yes, that is true. This blurriness is really driving me crazy, but that is true. Yeah, so as long as you are looking at realistic practice tests, if you're looking at practice tests from a source that is maybe not the most realistic, then maybe not. But if you are looking at official practice tests, recent official practice tests, then yes, it should be what you have seen on your practice tests. Hopefully you've taken a few practice tests. There are some concepts that don't show up on every single test. Usually it's the sort of things that show up at the end that only show up like once or twice. That might be, it might show up, it might not show up. So if you have taken practice tests semi-regularly, you should have seen those things. For the things that do show up at the end that only show up once, again, don't agonize over them, because if they only showed up once on that practice test, they're not going to show up like a ton of times on your actual exam. The things that you do see frequently on practice tests, that is what you will see frequently on your actual exam. All right, I know that we're at an hour. I'm going to keep going just because I do want to answer some of these questions. So if anyone is really dying for an answer for something specific, throw that in the chat now so I can get to it before we sign off. And if you're still with me, happy to have you here. All right. Any tips for the writing section? I don't have a clue how to study for it. Anna, great question. The writing section is kind of, oh, wait. When you say writing section, I'm guessing you mean the essay. I almost gave you an answer about the English section because, funnily enough, the English section on the SAT is called the writing section. So I'm going to guess you're talking about the essay. If you're not, correct me in the chat. How to study for the essay. My big recommendation would be, okay, great. Talking about the essay. My big recommendation would be to do some of the practice prompts. There are several practice prompts available. Here, this is where you need to be really careful to get a recent practice prompt because the essay used to be different. It changed in the last 6 years, I believe. So I was teaching when it happened. So if you go with an older test, it will be a different prompt. If you look at a newer test, though, it will be the same prompt. There are also, I believe, at least there were a few years ago, some additional prompts floating around just kind of without a test on the ACT website. If it's not on the ACT website, it's probably still floating around the internet somewhere. So I check those out. There are also some additional prompts from folks like us at Magoosh. There are some additional ones as well from other test prep companies. Would recommend giving that a Google, checking those out. Or if you want to sign up for the free trial of Magoosh, you should be able to see a couple of those. So my recommendation would be do it and try it timed, try the timing, try outlining, writing the essay, blah, blah, blah. Guidance there. I don't think we really have time to get into how to write this essay successfully, but there are a lot of good resources on how to write this essay successfully out there. We have some of them in Magoosh ACT. We have some of them on our blog. We actually have quite a few of them on our blog. We have some on blogs elsewhere. There are some on blogs from other test prep companies. I would recommend reading some articles about what a successful essay looks like. And if you can find example essays, that's one of the absolute best ways to learn what they're really looking for. So go, okay, this is what a good essay looks like. This is what a not so good essay looks like, and see if you can mirror your own essay after that structure. So that would be my recommendation. Read other essays, read articles from experts on it, and then try it. It's unfortunate that it's hard to get your essay scored, which is why we made the essay optional in our live streams earlier today. It is hard to get your essay scored, but looking at how other essays have been scored and what makes a good essay can really help you there. Cool. All right. I'm going to try one more thing to see if I can get this not blurry. One sec. Oh. It worked. Okay, amazing. All right, we're going to keep going. And if you do need to go, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to get to the rest of the questions. If you do want your question answered, throw that in the chat, and I'll stick around a little bit longer. All right. Boo, 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 boo. What else have we got? Yeah, so social and natural sciences passages are probably going to be the easier ones to skim. Humanities, it depends a little bit. And fiction, I find harder to skim just because there's kind of less structure to it. There's often more like dialogue, less paragraphs. If it's a more paragraph-based, like a literary narrative or fiction passage, then that's going to be a little bit easier to skim. But yeah, so typically things that are broken into paragraphs that have kind of more facts, more details, those are going to be much more efficient to skim. You can usually read less of those. Yeah, so Tanishka definitely does have you have the experience of certain sections are stronger, certain sections are weaker. So I would recommend hanging out with those sections that are a little bit weaker. The only exception to that would be like if you're applying to very specific programs and you know that they care more about certain sections, then that might change your approach. But in general, we want to bring up the weaker sections so that we can have a more balanced score. Typically that looks better, and typically it's easier to gain points that are kind of lower down than those points that are higher up. Okay, cool. If there isn't really a pattern to what you're seeing, what I would recommend is going, then why am I missing those questions? Like, do I know that rule? And if you know that rule, going, well, why didn't I see that? So looking for the clues and going, what sorts of clues am I missing? If I know the rule, why am I getting it wrong, right? And then if you're going, well, I didn't see this, make a little note of that. Put that on your strategy cheat sheet or your error log or whatever it is that you're writing down, because you should definitely be writing something down. Go, next time I'm committing to myself, I'm going to see that. I'm not going to miss it next time. And that's what's going to help improve that score further, is going, but why am I missing it? And usually it's less to do with the content and knowing the rule, and more has to do with recognizing it or applying it in a certain context. So it gets a little bit tricky. It's what you would do with a tutor, but you can do it on your own if you're willing to put in the effort and analyze each of those questions. Okay. Anna having similar experiences. So same advice to you. Really try to focus on improving on your weaknesses. Atnia says, even though I know how to solve them, I always end up messing up on the last 5 questions, mostly because of time. Should I start from question 60? Great question, and I'm really hoping you're still here. Don't start from the end. Don't start from the end. It really is true that they front load what are supposed to be the simpler and faster questions at the beginning, and then backload the questions that are meant to be more time consuming, more difficult. So my recommendation is, if you are running out of time and struggling with those last 5 questions, those are very likely to be the questions you would struggle with anyway, or the questions that would eat up the most time. That's okay. What you could do if you're going like, but I know how to do those, see if throughout the process there are questions that you are spending too much time with that you're missing, right? Or that you're spending too much time with that you end up guessing. And see if you can move past those, just skip over those so that you have more time for those ending questions. That would be my recommendation, so that you do end up with more time at the end to address those questions. And then you can go back and try to address those ones that you skipped over. But if those last 5 questions are the hardest ones for you, then those are probably the best ones to run out of time on, if that makes sense. Hopefully that helps. But yes, please don't start from the end. That's usually a mistake. You end up investing too much time in those harder questions and then run out of time for questions that you would have gotten quickly had you started at the beginning. So skip throughout, but start from the beginning, move toward the end. Okay, time management strategies for each different section. Whew, that would that would probably take a while. I'm going to give some general recommendations, and then more specific ones, maybe we can make a video on that. I know we have some additional videos on our channel with timing recommendations. I really recommend checking out our channel. We have a lot of videos with really good advice. So I'd recommend checking that out. For passage-based ones like English, reading, and science, you don't have to do the passages in order. Start with the ones that are easier, save the ones that are harder for you at the end. Not for English, but for reading and for science, I recommend skimming the passage, not reading every single word. For English, it's a little bit different because you're not really reading that. You're kind of just doing the questions as you go. For reading and science, I recommend predicting answers to your questions rather than trying to do straight process of elimination when possible. What else do I recommend? For passage-based sections, again, so that's English, reading, and science, know approximately how much time you have for each passage and its questions. Use that as a marker to figure out if you're ahead or behind, and try to not let yourself get too far behind. If you are behind, know that you need to speed up your process a little bit. Those are probably my best time management tips there. For math, since you don't have passages to guide you, I would recommend just having kind of the rule of approximately 10 questions every 10 minutes. You're trying to go shorter on the front end so that you have a little more time to spread out toward the end where you get into the more complicated questions. And then big recommendation across the board, not only can you skip passages just like entirely and come back to them, you can skip individual questions. That's a really important thing on math. If you're struggling, if it's taking too long, if you think you're going to get it wrong, skip it, come back to it later. Focus on the things that you're going to get right and that you're going to get right quickly. Okay, there's so much more to discuss there, but again, check out our videos. We've got a lot more that go more into depth on that subject. If I have taken a section of the ACT every other day, but have only taken a full practice test once, will endurance largely affect my score? Great question, Elise. Maybe. It depends on how that other practice test went. If it was like relatively smooth, it was fine, it's more likely that your test day is going to be a-okay. I recommend taking a full practice test before your test day. So if your test day is this weekend, do that this weekend. If your test day is next weekend, do your full practice test this weekend, maybe like tomorrow morning or Monday morning, and just do a full one. If you've got a little bit more time, do at least one like the weekend before, or you can kind of stagger them leading them up to your test day. But I would recommend trying to do full-length practice tests, again, every few weeks. And that, again, just helps make sure that that endurance is a habit and that you're used to it. That test day doesn't come as a shock to your system. And I think that's about it. Thank you so much, guys. I'm so glad that you guys are here. I'm so glad that we had such good questions in the chat. If you guys have additional questions after this, you can throw those in the comments on this video when it does upload. It's going to take a little bit of time for it to process, but you can throw those questions in the comments. We do have people, not me, but we do have people who check those comments and respond to them. So hopefully you can get your questions answered there. And again, if you want more support like this, the Magoosh program, the Magoosh ACT program is really, really awesome. We have an amazing live support system, our student help, that can help answer questions like I did today. So really recommend that if you're looking for additional support. And then again, big plug to taking practice tests. If you weren't able to take that test with us today, you can watch back through that live stream and take the test along with it, or you can take it on your own. But if you do have a test day coming up this month, please take a practice test. It is really, really useful for you. All right, thank you so much for sticking around. I'm gonna go ahead and close out now, but hopefully I will see you guys again soon. Talk to you later, bye.